Hey, it's great to be here, everybody. I'm going to speak. I'll do a presentation. Let me run through it, and then we'll do Q&A. I'm going to speak about 4 meanings of liberty. The word table you're accustomed with, and it's sort of a sign for something like that. You could say this signifies that. This sign signifies this kind of object. So a word is a sign, and the thing signified is the signification. But we also have other things that we go by the name table, like the periodic table or tables in research articles and so on. And so a word can have more than one signification: poly, many, more than one, not mono. Sem, like in semantics, is a word for signification, meaning. And so we're talking about polysemy today because we're talking about 4 meanings of the word liberty. And that's opposed to monosemy, when a word has just one signification. And polysemy is a very common thing. And liberty then is polysemous. The term has many, many meanings, as opposed to being monosemous. And I think important words tend to be like this. Most important words in a culture, in a civilization, I think that these have always been polysemous. I'd like also to say, though, that I think that these words had certain meanings of these words were particularly forward or salient in what you might think of as sort of the period of liberal ascendancy. And when is that period? I don't know when to start it, really, maybe 1700, 1725. And then at the end of the 19th century, I think things turn against liberalism in its original political sense. But we still, of course, have a legacy of that original liberalism. So these words are not, or these meanings are not by any means run out of town, at least not yet. And in a way, this talk is about firming up and resuscitating the classical liberal, what I'll call the classical liberal meaning of this word in particular. And a number of figures we're going to talk about, but Adam Smith first. And I like the way he does it best, frankly. He talks liberty very importantly in The Wealth of Nations. And this is a very important passage where he speaks of allowing every man to pursue his own interest, his own way, upon the liberal plan of equality, liberty, and justice. So this usage of the word liberty, and this is pretty much the only way this word is used in The Wealth of Nations, is very much in line with what I'm calling the classical liberal meaning of that word. And so he uses that word this way, particularly here, but to get a deeper and firmer and more proper understanding of that word, you need to go here. This book more deals with the jurisprudence that leads into political economy and the wealth of nations. Before political economy in the 18th century, there was jurisprudence in the 17th century and prior, of course, but kind of the way this liberal jurisprudence emerged came, like Grotius is a very important figure in that. His great 3-volume work is 1625. And then others like him, like Pufendorf, like Barbeyrac in France, who translated things and added to things. And then that gets picked up in Scotland and elsewhere, but in Scotland by the Glasgow professor Carmichael, onto his student, the Glasgow professor Hutchison, and onto his student, the Glasgow professor Adam Smith. And we just need to understand that a good understanding of liberty has to have this. I like to use the expression jural theory, which is a little exotic, perhaps, and I won't elaborate on it right now. John Diesel and I have a piece explaining that word in the latest issue of Economic Affairs. So in the theory of moral sentiments, one of the virtues that you are to practice, one of your duties, is commutative justice, the most sacred laws of which are not to mess with your neighbor's person, property, promises due. There's a very famous statement of what's covered by this commutative justice, this duty of yours toward your neighbor. Now, the old way, an ancient and Grotius way of capsulizing this justice is abstaining from what is another's. This appears in the theory of moral sentiments in exactly this connection. Believe me, I'm not making any of this up. I have a different way of expressing this, not messing with other people's stuff. I think this is an improvement for a number of reasons. One is that by separating the not here, where it's kind of built into the concept of abstaining, we then have messing, which we can focus on. What is messing? What counts as messing? What about in this period of time and this place on earth versus that community in history? And so messing is, got to be figured out kind of like the parts of historical languages. Messing, and we separate out stuff here naturally in terms of what all are the things, the property or the promises do, and then whose it is. So I just think this parses a little better. So I promote it a great deal. And as you can see here, it's just another way of putting the same concept. It lines up clearly. So it's just my way of putting this classical way, which, as I say, appears in all of these jurisprudence writers. So that's the duty or virtue, commutative justice, not messing with other people's stuff. And it has a flip side, others not messing with one's stuff or your stuff. And that being free from messing, particularly with respect to the governor or the government, Smith calls liberty. And that's what liberty is in the Wealth of Nations. That's what liberty is essentially in the classical liberal meaning of the word. Okay. He's got expressions which show this flip side very clearly. For example, he speaks of two interventions which he happens to oppose, and he says that both were evident violations of natural liberty and therefore unjust. That is, therefore, commutatively unjust. They were restricting freedom of contract or messing with citizens' property. And then he goes on to say, by the way, not only were they unjust in the commutative sense, but they were undesirable. They were, you could say, unjust in larger senses. So it's very clear, this whole line of reasoning in Smith. I don't think we should let people efface it from Smith and efface the classical liberal meaning of liberty, the original political sense of the term liberal, and so on. So when he says allowing every man to pursue his own interest his own way, he means allowing every man to do what he finds worth doing with his own stuff, provided he does not mess with other people's stuff, right, upon the liberal plan of justice. So this is about, the guy not being messed with. It's very clear. So we're going to talk about the Frenchman Constant and his essay making this distinction between modern and ancient liberty. And we're going to talk, why did this stop moving? About Isaiah Berlin a little bit, and his distinction between negative and positive. Just a little mention of Hayek, and then I'm going to right now move to Aron, who in this review essay on Hayek's Constitution of Liberty lays out the four meanings very nicely. And it was reading that prompted me to develop this talk. I said, hey, this is great. This is really a great listing of four important meanings. And let's follow that and, examine these four meanings. You see, with these polysemous words, the idea is not, oh, we're going to insist on monosemy, the definition I like. That's not really the spirit. It's about, the spirit is more like learn to distinguish the different ones, learn to see them in what people say. And so you can separate them, you can think about them separately. But that said, I am also very interested in clarifying and advancing, you could say expounding this one, which Aron is also interested in, and which indeed I think these two are both interested in doing. So we just talked about what that means, the classical liberal meaning, the others not messing with one's stuff. What else does Aron see? Another one is political participation. That's kind of that you might call that a kind of political liberty. It's voting rights, it's participation rights, it's voice rights. You could kind of draw the lines different ways. To some extent, it intersects and relates to this meaning. For example, freedom of the press is freedom to use your printing press, your stuff without being messed with, and so on. But there's broader political form, political procedure issues here, which I do think are absolutely separate from this, not covered by this, and are extremely important. So we'll say a little bit more about that. There's national sovereignty in the sense that, well, gee, if we have one group of people that we kind of see as a polity or even a nation that we think ought to be thought of as a sovereign polity, then another overlordish nation, a suzerain or an imperial force, preventing them from doing their own thing politically with their own political institutions, their own sovereignty, that is what's going on here. And this relates to, well, in American history, it relates very much to the American War for Independence, where the colonies began to feel like, you know what, we're sovereign, and we shouldn't really be under Britain anymore. And so they're doing this third kind of liberty here in that respect. It also relates to the Civil War, where the Southern states said, hey, we want out of this pact. See you later. And so that wasn't acceptable to the other states in the North. And so there was a war. The EU today, things like Brexit, this relates to, and so on. And then the fourth one is really quite broad. And you can just kind of think of it as capabilities. These capabilities, people might emphasize different kinds of things here, just wealth, just comfort, just living well, living long, living happily, just, having the means to pursue your interests, to raise a family, what have you. Kind of speaking of that in terms of liberty, it could be about actualization of things that are thought to be true to one's nature, and so on. And so this maps to these guys. Constance modern maps to the classical liberal, and ancient to political participation. And for Berlin, negative maps to classical liberal, and his positive to this capabilities. So I want to just elaborate a little bit, Constant and Berlin, and then close it. So Constant, modern, again, which is like the classical liberal. I think this is a really great quote to capture it. Here in this upper part, we really see the classical liberal nature here. He says it is the right of everyone to express, choose, practice, dispose of, even abuse property, to come and go without having to account, to associate, to discuss, to profess their own religion, to occupy their days. And so basically he's saying, live without being messed with. That's essentially what he's saying here. That's the long description here. And then in this pink color, we have another dimension, which he does see as part of liberty today in 1819, but it's different. Finally, it is everyone's right to exercise some influence on the administration of the government, either by electing all or particular officials or through representations, petitions, demands to which the authorities are compelled to heed. So he does include some of that number 2 here, the political participation as part of modern liberty, but it's very, very clear from the speech that this is drawn from that it's the first part that is really the central aspect of modern liberty and which forms the contrast that he is drawing between modern and ancient. He says that in the ancient world, numerous institutions hindered individual liberty. And he says explicitly, individual liberty, I repeat, is the true modern liberty. So, you can think of the classical liberal definition as essentially the central aspect of Constant's modern, whereas his ancient, just to give a little elaboration to that, consisted in exercising collectively but directly several parts of the complete sovereignty, in deliberating in the public square over war and peace, in forming alliances with foreign governments, in voting laws, in pronouncing judgments, in examining the accounts, acts, stewardship of the magistrates, in calling them to assemblies, accusing, condemning, absolving them. So it's really about political participation. And that was the central thing people had in mind when they spoke about. Okay, so let's look at Berlin and his distinction, also very famous. Negative involves always recognizable frontier. That's kind of like the boundaries of property and promises due, that you are not to be messed with. He says not to be interfered with. He describes it as liberty from, absence of interference. And indeed, he associates it with Constant's modern liberty. Now, I think it's proper to very much kind of see classical liberal liberty in Berlin's negative liberty. It's a more fudged, I think Constant is clearer here. I mean, he's closer to when all of this stuff was very explicit and articulated. So it was natural for him to be clearer. You see, I actually think the 18th century was much better in having that good rooting in jurisprudence, like we talked about. They didn't run away from that, whereas later on, that's more obscured. It's even tabooed in a way to get down to the real nuts and bolts of liberty, of messing with, of stuff, of who owns the stuff. Because, well, we can maybe talk about why there might be taboos and denials about that. But so I think Berlin is kind of vaguer and more fudged, but ultimately I think it's, again, the kind of center of what he means by negative liberty, whereas his positive liberty is, again, this broad kind of undefined capabilities, fulfilling some true nature. And the true nature, according to some positive liberty theorist, might be very much man as, an active political, as a political actor, and as someone who feels very integrated, you could say, into the kind of political spirit very cohesive with the political community. So if that's their idea of what our true nature is, then it spells a certain kind of politics to achieve this positive liberty, right? And, Berlin's drift is not to say, positive, bad, negative, good, but it is to rehabilitate negative and to caution the world against positive. He's saying that positive has been abused. It's often been dangerous. It's often been used by, socialists, communists, totalitarians, interventionists of all sorts, saying that they're for liberty when they're doing terrible things. So his general drift was, I would say, classical liberal, but again, he's more fudged than the other figures, much more fudged, more fudged than the other figures, the other four figures I've mentioned in this talk. So again, just now to review, classical liberal, political participation, national sovereignty, this broad capabilities. So for Constant, these two, and mapped to the first two, and Berlin, these map to the first and the fourth. But again, the point of all this is really to get Adam Smith right, to get the original liberalism right, the original liberal era right. I think the real spine of Western civilization is the liberalism. So we need really to get that all right. We need to again get down to see the jurisprudence ideas or jural theory ideas that really lie behind this and constitute what this whole concept is. This, the commutative justice he spoke of as a kind of social grammar, with precise and accurate rules, just as grammar has precise and accurate rules, whereas aesthetics does not. And this idea of getting back to this more grammar-like notion of justice, the commutative justice, and its flip side, liberty, I think is, just absolutely essential. Thank you for your attention.